All right, let's just dive right in. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to take something that usually puts people right to sleep, the dry, mechanical procedures of legislative enactment, and we're going to look at it for what it truly is, a thrilling survival story. Seriously, every single law you see on the books today started out as just a fragile little idea, a proposed law that had to run this massive, grueling constitutional gauntlet just to survive. So today, we are following the hero's journey of a bill. Here is the roadmap for the gauntlet our protagonist has to navigate today. We'll start with the birth of a bill, then see how it survives the 3 readings, navigate the bicameral conference committee, face the president's final say, and finally pass the ultimate constitutional test. So let's start with part 1, the birth of a bill. In a Republican system, the actual power to make laws belongs solely to Congress. That's the Senate and the House. And this is exactly where our story kicks off. A bill is really just a draft. It's an idea, kind of a wish list written by a lawmaker. But to actually become a statute, a real binding law, it has to prove it has what it takes. It has to survive. The journey officially begins when an author drafts the proposed bill, signs it, and files it with the Secretary of the Assembly. Then it gets what they call calendared, basically put on the schedule, for its first reading. Now, don't let the word reading fool you here. It's not some grand, sweeping speech. At this stage, literally only the number and title are read aloud. It's just a super quick, formal introduction before it gets sent off to the appropriate committee. Moving right along to part 2, surviving the 3 readings. This right here is the core obstacle course, and it is directly dictated by the Constitution. After that initial first reading, the committee completely takes over. They hold public hearings, they call in the experts, and ultimately they decide the bill's fate. If the committee issues an unfavorable report, boom, the bill is dead. Game over. But if it manages to survive, it moves forward to face the second and third readings. Now, the absolute most crucial thing to grasp here is the massive difference between the second and third readings. It's like night and day. During the second reading, the bill is read in its entirety. It is opened up for debates. Lawmakers can jump in and propose amendments, strike things out, add things in. It is chaotic. It's transformative. Actually, after all the amendments, the bill might not even look anything like the original author's idea anymore. But the third reading, it is completely 100% rigid. Only the title is read, and absolutely 0 amendments are allowed. You just vote yes or no. That's it. So why make this whole process so torturous? Well, it's deliberately designed to prevent hasty and improvident or careless legislation. The Constitution even strictly requires that final, printed copies be distributed to every single member 3 full days before that final vote. It literally forces lawmakers to hit the brakes, study the measure, and know exactly what they are voting on. Which brings us to part 3, the bicameral conference committee. Okay, picture this. What happens if our bill survives the House, goes over to the Senate, but then the Senate passes a slightly modified version of it? If there's a variance between the 2 versions, the bill doesn't just die. Instead, it gets sent over to a highly powerful group known as the bicameral conference committee, and their job is to hammer out a compromise. And this committee is incredibly influential. So much so that the Supreme Court literally considers it a sort of third legislative chamber. They aren't just copy editors fixing typos. They can actually introduce brand new amendments or completely delete entire provisions, all to forge a compromise bill that both houses will eventually agree on. But wait. This brings up a massive constitutional question, right? If this committee is in there adding or deleting provisions at the 11th hour, doesn't that totally violate the strict no amendment rule we literally just talked about for the third reading? Well, the courts have actually ruled that the no amendment rule applies only to bills being introduced for the very first time in either house. It does not apply to the conference committee report, and if you think about it, it has to be that way. If it did apply, negotiations would just grind to a halt, and you could never actually reconcile disagreeing bills. They absolutely need that flexibility to compromise. All right, on to part 4, the president's final say. So, our bill has survived the House, the Senate, and the conference committee. Both houses gave their final official approval. So, we're done, right? It's a law? No way. Absolutely not. It now faces the final boss, the executive branch. This right here is the ultimate check and balance in the entire legislative process. Once it hits the president's desk, the bill faces one of three possible fates. Number one, the president signs it, and boom, it's law. Number two, the president vetoes it, sending it right back to Congress with a list of objections. Or number three, the president just ignores it, literally. If the president does absolutely nothing for 30 days, the bill miraculously lapses into law anyway, exactly as if it had been signed. But here's the kicker. Even a presidential veto isn't necessarily a permanent death sentence. It is a huge hurdle, for sure, but Congress actually has a resurrection spell. If they decide to reconsider the vetoed bill, they can override the president's veto by securing a 2/3 vote of all members in both houses. That forces the bill to become law, completely despite the president's objections. Finally, we arrive at Part 5, the constitutional tests. Behind this entire journey, there are these sort of invisible guardrails dictating exactly what can and cannot be done. Take a look at this absolute ironclad rule. Every bill passed by Congress shall embrace only one subject which shall be expressed in the title thereof. This is famously known as the One Title One Subject Rule. So why this specific rule? Well, it exists to stop what they call log rolling, which is when politicians trade favors to pass completely unrelated laws bundled up together. It also prevents riders, those sneaky little provisions hidden deep inside a bill that have absolutely nothing to do with the main subject. Ultimately, it guarantees that no one is tricked and the public knows exactly what is being legislated. No nasty surprises, no legislative fraud. This entire mechanical procedure is totally bound by these constitutional limits. For example, remember earlier we mentioned that printed copies have to be distributed 3 days before the final reading? Well, the Constitution actually allows only one single exception to that rule, and that's if the president explicitly certifies that the immediate enactment of the bill is necessary to meet a public calamity or emergency. Without that specific certification, there is no way you are bypassing that waiting period. So, zooming out, the really crucial takeaway from all of this is that the journey from a simple draft to a legally binding statute is intentionally grueling. It's meant to be hard. These aren't just bureaucratic hoops set up for the sake of annoyance. The 3 readings, the strict voting, the veto power, the one subject rule, they all act together as this massive, multi-layered quality control filter. And it's all designed to protect the people from flawed or deceitful laws. Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to close out today's explainer. When you really look at this incredibly arduous, treacherous journey a bill has to survive, a journey that is expressly designed to prevent hasty legislation, does our system make it too hard for our government to act quickly? Or is it just hard enough to keep us safe? Definitely something to think about the next time you hear a new bill has been proposed. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.